All right, let's get into it. Last time, we looked at the subject's biological capabilities. What makes her a physical powerhouse. But today, we're going way deeper. We're talking about the most unpredictable part of her entire arsenal, her metaphysical and mystical side. And believe me, this is where her threat level just goes off the charts.
And we're starting with this quote because it really gets to the heart of the whole thing. It's the central paradox, right? How can someone whose entire identity is a complete mess of manipulated stories end up with a power that makes her totally immune to reality warping? Well, that's exactly what we're about to unpack.
So first, you have to understand the core problem. For literally decades, this character's backstory was all over the place, totally inconsistent. And everyone just saw it as, a flaw in the writing. But the current canon, it does something brilliant. It reframes that whole mess and says the chaos wasn't a mistake. It was a weapon being used against her.
I mean, for 50 years, her history was torn between these two completely incompatible origins. So what was she? A sci-fi refugee from a planet where rivers literally flowed with blood? Or was she some kind of mythological demon, the daughter of a primordial entity? This contradiction wasn't just a story detail. It created this fundamental instability in her very being.
And the way the new canon solves this is it's fascinating. It doesn't pick a side. Nope. Instead, it takes this real-world mess of continuity errors and makes it the actual foundation for an in-universe psychological horror story. The problem itself became the plot.
So how'd they pull it off? Well, with two really clever ideas. First, her homeworld, Draculon, isn't really a planet anymore. It's Arcadia, a twilight dimension where things like sci-fi and magic can just coexist. And second, her mother Lilith's magic mirror is basically an in-universe retcon button, implanting whatever false memories suited her manipulative games. Lilith literally becomes the writer of her own daughter's trauma. Now, having this fractured identity makes her incredibly vulnerable to two very specific, very scary meta-level threats. And these aren't just your average villains. They're more like competing philosophical ideas for how the universe should end, and she is caught right in the middle of them. So this lays out the impossible choice she's facing. On one hand, you've got a universe of perfect, sterile logic where free will is seen as a system error. On the other, a universe of meaningless chaos where nothing is real and your identity has no anchor. I mean, is one really any better than the other? Okay, let's break down these two threats. You've got Vril Dox, this creature of pure mind, who basically sees chaos as a cosmic mistake that needs to be deleted. And then you have the Continuist, who's a literal daemon of retcon. He embodies narrative decay and wants to turn all of reality into cheap, throwaway fiction. And get this, the Continuist's method is wild. He doesn't just blow up cities, he steals their cohesion. He'll inject thousands of contradictory histories into a place, so one person wakes up in a city founded by Vikings, while their neighbor lives in one made of clockwork. He literally weaponizes the exact kind of narrative instability that has defined Vampirella's entire life. So, how in the world do you fight back against that? How do you beat villains who are attacking the very concept of reality? You don't just find a bigger gun. The solution is actually this profound philosophical breakthrough. This is the real turning point. And here it is, the big revelation. She stops looking for a real past. She finally understands that the chaos, the manipulation, the lies, all of it, that was her one true story. The fact that she had no foundation is the foundation. Before this, her whole existence was defined by a philosophical concept called ressentiment. It's basically this state of paralysis, this deep-seated frustration from being just a passive object in your own life, only knowing yourself by what your mother, the writer, told you that you were. But she counters this by embracing what's called the Dionysian spirit. She just accepts the chaos. She stops seeing her contradictory nature as a weakness and starts seeing it for what it is, a source of radical, absolute freedom and power. And all of this leads to her final form, the Übermensch, or as the source material so perfectly calls it, the self-begotten. She's not a character in someone else's story anymore. She's become her own author. And the source material just lays out this philosophical war perfectly. First, you have Vril Dox, demanding his universe of pure logic, a perfect script with no room for mistakes, or, God forbid, free will. Then, of course, you have the Continuist, arguing for the exact opposite, a universe of meaningless, sensational pulp, a reality where stability is boring and truth is just whatever story sells best today.
And Vampirella, she just rejects both of them. She basically walks on stage and declares that she's not a character in their cosmic play anymore. The origin story is dead. From now on, she writes her own script.
Okay, so how does this philosophical shift actually become something real? How does it turn into a superpower, a tactical weapon she can use against these insane, meta-level threats? Well, her new self-begotten state gives her something the analysis calls causal resistance. Think of it as a high-level defense against reality warping. I mean, how can the Continuist attack her with narrative chaos when she's already made peace with it? How can VrilDocs solve her with logic when she is, by her very nature, a walking contradiction that completely breaks his binary code?
And the source dossier gives us the absolute perfect analogy to wrap our heads around this. If another subject we've looked at, the Blood Sun of Apocalypse, is like an indestructible tank programmed for absolute order, Vampirella is something else entirely. She's a hurricane.
And that's exactly what makes her so dangerous. You can't out-logic a hurricane. You can't reprogram it. Her inherent unpredictability, which was once her greatest weakness, has now become her single most powerful weapon. She's a living glitch in the perfect equations of her enemies.
Which brings us to this final thought. We just saw how a character's biggest flaw, a messy, contradictory past, was transformed into her greatest strength. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If our own identity is just a story we tell ourselves, what kind of power could we unlock if we finally decided to pick up the pen?